All right, everyone. Welcome to the Stoa, the return. Well, maybe it's not really the return. I shouldn't be too soon. I don't want to spoil the punchline, but yeah, Metagame Mastermind. 1 year later, the sexy Armenian himself, Daniel Kazandjian, is here. For those of you who might remember that Daniel started the Metagame Mastermind here at the Stoa. I think the first session was April 4th of last year. I just looked it up. And it went on for months, and I think it ended near the end of last summer. And Daniel was still metagame masterminding with his pod that he arranged in his when he set up the metagame masterminds in the original sessions, which he'll talk about. And so he's going to talk about his findings in it. And so he's going to do a 20-minute presentation, and then we'll do some activities and some Q&A. So that being said, Daniel, welcome back to the Stoa, my friend.
Thanks, Peter. It's really, really good to be here, and it's awesome to see some of these familiar faces from a year ago. So I'm going to start with a presentation, and we're also going to get into a breakout room at some point, so get ready. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah, all right. So Metagame Mastermind 1 year later. So it's really been a little over a year since we started this. And tonight, I'm going to do a presentation on what the Metagame Mastermind was originally. We're going to do a review for some of the people who don't know. And then I'm going to talk about what we learned. And then I'm going to say a couple words about what's next. And then after that, we're going to have an activity/group discussion, which the only thing I'll say about that now is in preparation for it, think about something that you know it would be good for you to do. Something in your life, some project, maybe some habit that you need to adopt or get rid of that you just haven't done yet. For whatever reason, you could do it, but you haven't done it. And that's going to become relevant in the group exercise. So to begin, just a bit of housekeeping. These sessions, we always like to make them more participatory and kind of in keeping with how we did the Metagame Mastermind. If you can, turn your video on. It's better to see everybody's faces. I can see everybody in the room right now, so I'll get a reaction from reading the room. And use the chat, have a parallel conversation, message each other, respond to each other, and see if you can make a friend. And a lot of friends were made during the Metagame Mastermind. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, last year, it's 2020, end of March, early April, COVID hit. And it rocked our worlds. For most of us, it was pretty dramatic. And I remember Jordan Hall described the problem at one of the early Stoa sessions. And this slide is actually from, I think, the very first Metagame Mastermind session, where he said, the physical health crisis is quickly turning into a mental health crisis. And that was the original problem that the Metagame Mastermind kind of grew out of. We were trying to think of how we could respond to this. And some of the issues that we were facing due to lockdown were social isolation, joblessness, loss of income, and for a lot of people, loss of purpose, breakdown in sense making, not really knowing up from down anymore, the really vicious news cycle, and then mortality salience. So a lot of people looked into the void and they had never looked at it before. And finally, this was in an environment where you had the most sophisticated form of escapism that humanity has ever conjured. At Netflix, you had fast food delivery, internet pornography, social media, etc. The addiction business model was in full tilt. And not to get too morbid here, but since this slide from a year ago to today, in that year, I actually lost 2 friends due to suicide as a result of mental illness. And they were both in their early mid-20s. So this was a real problem. This has probably affected a bunch of people in the room in different ways, maybe directly, maybe indirectly. And it continues to be a problem. So today, I'm in Toronto. We're still in some form of lockdown 1 year later. This is what a lot of people call the meta crisis, because it's not just one thing. It's not just COVID. It's not just breakdown in sense making. It's not just the economy. It's everything and more. So this is what we refer to as the meta crisis. And we had a hypothesis, kind of a modest response to something so daunting, which was, you need a gang. You can't do this alone. In order to respond to something as big as the meta crisis, you need to cultivate or maintain your sense of sovereignty, which I'll get into what that means, but you can't do it alone. You need a gang. And that's what the Metagame Mastermind was meant to do. So let's get into some definitions. We'll go pretty quickly through this. What is the metagame? I keep saying it. It's kind of a clunky word. It's basically the game of games. It's taking a step back from all the games that you could be playing and developing the right relationship with all of them. So you might opt out of some, you might decide to double down on others. And some of the games that you might be playing could have to do with your personal development, your fitness, your career, your productivity, things like that. What is a mastermind? Well, this is a definition from Napoleon Hill, a friendly alliance to encourage people to follow through with their plans and their purposes, or the normie take, an accountability group. So these are kind of starting points, and that was the frame for our group. And personal sovereignty, which is something that's been thrown around, is simply defined as the ability to respond and not react. So you can imagine with all the craziness of the meta crisis, everyone's very reactive. Other synonyms could be agency, willpower, self-discipline, things like that. We had this model for how to operationalize personal sovereignty. And if you look at the bottom right, the goal is to respond to the meta crisis. And in order to do so effectively, you got to get good at choice making. You have to make good choices. To make good choices, you have to make sense of the world. And both of these things rest on personal sovereignty, the ability to respond and not to react. To make this more concrete, we broke this down into two categories. The first is, in order to be sovereign, you have to manage your addictions. If you're addicted to social media, then you are being programmed by somebody else's goals, and you are not sovereign. You're reacting to technology. If you're addicted to some substance, the same kind of thing. So manage your addictions was step one. And then the other was manage your physiology. And this breaks down into the classic categories: sleep, nutrition, exercise, and meditation. These things are kind of hard to do, and they're especially hard to do alone. The way we simplified this was in 3 steps. There's a life practice, which is, it could be something like meditate every day, or it could be exercise every day, or maybe you want to get your sleep in order, so you make some sort of commitment about when you're going to bed. Then for your addictions, you could have a negation. So you're going to stop going on Instagram or something like that. You're going to delete your Netflix account. And then we had this category for responding to the meta crisis known as gifts. What is your gift? What is something that you can do? Maybe you can help out in your local community. Maybe there's somebody you know that needs some help, and you can give them that help. So version 1. Last year, we took all these elements, we put people in groups of 3, we called them triads, and we had these 2-week sprints where you would commit to a life practice, you would commit to a negation, and you would commit to a gift. And people would meet on these weekly housekeeping calls. So once a week, you'd meet together and you check in to see how you were doing with those 3 things. And there was a shared WhatsApp group, which later became a Signal group, because nobody should be using WhatsApp anymore. And this was for maintaining communication throughout the week. And then by yourself in between, you were just practicing the things that you committed to. These triads were operating in orbit around the Stoa, and we had these metagame sessions on, I think they were weekly at times, and then sometimes they were bi-weekly. And the really cool thing is, even when we stopped the Metagame Mastermind sessions, a lot of these triads just continued. And I know of a few examples, and some of the people are actually in this room, where they just continued on with that version 1 prototype, and maybe they tweaked it and they came up with new things. And I actually continued on for a year. So what did we learn from that year? I'm going to go through a subset of all the things we learned, some of them juicier, more tactical takeaways, and then we'll get into group discussion. So the first thing is, accountability is more important than achievement. This means if you didn't keep up with your life practice, that's fine, but as long as you were very clear that you didn't keep up with it, that mattered more. bringing awareness to your life, not only from yourself, but from the group of people that you're in, seemed to be the most powerful mechanism. And maintaining that accountability and not being too hard on yourself when you fell off the horse was a really, really important principle. There's something here also about the power of just being able to confess things to people, being able to share when things got tough. So accountability is better than achievement. The next thing we learned is there are two types of self-discipline. And the first one we called hard discipline, which is kind of with my question earlier, when there's something that you know you should be doing that you're not doing, you can kind of get yourself to do it through willpower, sheer effort, and then the social pressure of the group that you're in. And that has its pros and cons, as you can imagine. And then the other was soft discipline, which is when you align your actions with your better judgment just through better understanding. So you're no longer using willpower, you're just understanding the situation better, and then it's becoming easier to actually be disciplined, quote unquote. And I'm starting to actually distance myself from the term discipline for this reason. This is related to the groups, the gangs, because a gang can put social pressure on you to get you to do something that's hard to do, or they can really help you with understanding. Those conversations that you're having on a weekly basis, conversations in the Signal chat, they can help you understand why you're having difficulty with something that might be good for you to do. And this, at the end of the day, is a lot more powerful and sustainable. The other thing is something that emerged for actually doing work. So there's different versions of this. I call them Pomodoro Sessions. So the Pomodoro technique is when you work for 25 minutes and you take a 5-minute break. And something that emerged throughout the last year was these group sessions where people would come in, they'd say what they're going to work on for those 25 minutes, and then they take a 5-minute break, and they chat with each other. And what was really great about this was there were a lot of people who were working remotely and they were isolated at home. And so being able to tune in to a Pomodoro session not only improved their productivity, but also gave them a social fix. And this was huge. There are different versions of this. At the Stoa, there was something called the Stoic Hustle, which is the same concept. And in the very first iteration of the Metagame Mastermind, we had writing rooms. And basically it was a Zoom room that you'd pop in, and you might see some familiar faces here, and you just write for an hour and you share your intentions. So these are all kind of in the same category of group working sessions that I call Pomodoro sessions. The next thing we learned is it's better to start with negations than it is to start with life practices. So it's hard to add new things when the system or the situation that you're in doesn't have a good foundation to begin with. So if you're addicted to YouTube, for instance, and then you want to start meditating, it's going to be really hard to add that meditation practice. It helps to start by just cutting out YouTube for a week. There's something really powerful about this. Some people call this via negativa. If you follow Nassim Taleb, you know this concept as well. As soon as you negate something that has been taxing your attention, your capacity increases a little bit. And then with that capacity, you can now invest that into adding a life practice. So that order of operations was an important insight. Another thing for being more tactical was the importance of accumulating gang knowledge. So I set up these Notion documents. So Notion is a note-taking app. You can do this in Google Docs or anywhere else, where we would keep track of all the housekeeping calls. So basically weekly meetings. And we keep track of our sprints, and then we keep track of any resources that we found along the way. So over time, you start accumulating wisdom in a shared body of knowledge, and all the gang members were involved in co-creating this. A related point was celebrate all your wins. So in that last slide, you may have seen there was a little page for celebrating wins. No win is too small. So anything that is a step in the right direction, write it down, share it with the group, share it in the Signal chat. This increases the playfulness and the dopamine associated with cultivating sovereignty. It no longer becomes this overly self-serious thing where you're failing every now and then. It becomes very celebratory. And one of the most surprising benefits of having a group of people that you are doing accountability with is that you actually have people to share good news with. And that seems like a mundane, subtle point, but I can't overstate the significance of this. There's actually some neuroscience on the most important thing you can do to rapidly adopt a habit is to increase the significance and the speed of the reward that you get when you do the habit. So learning how to celebrate is an amazing skill for building character and building sovereignty. And the final thing I'll say, kind of in closing, is initially a lot of people came to cultivate sovereignty. They came to develop discipline. They came because they wanted to get their shit together. And really what emerged in my experience and in some of the experiences I've heard from others is that you came for the sovereignty and you stayed for the gang. And I think this is actually a really profound point. And I'll share something that happened to me a few times. I noticed that when I jump into these Pomodoro sessions, these working sessions, as soon as I'd step into the Zoom room, I'd notice that my values would all of a sudden get a little more energy. Like the things that I cared about all of a sudden would become more salient to me because everybody else in that room cared about the same things. And then it dawned on me one day that we're actually creating microcultures by developing relationships with people that really matter. Like I care about the opinions of the people in my gang and they care about my opinion. First of all, I just want to see them. I just want to spend more time with them. And second, just by doing that, I am naturally developing more soft discipline or sovereignty without needing all the structure that we saw in the version 1 prototype. So at some point, it shifted from structured accountability to more like vibing, for lack of a better term. And you just vibe your way to sovereignty. And the final thing I'll say on this is there is a misapprehension in the standard notion of accountability. Most of the time when we think about accountability and the way that I thought about it, it's you have something in your life that's difficult to do and you want to leverage social pressure so you can get yourself to do it. But implicit in that framing is this idea that you are isolated from all these other people. It has a pretty naive sense of individualism built into it. And by practicing with these gangs, you start to realize that, cheesy self-help quote, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. It's actually deeply profound. It literally is the case that the boundary between me and the people I spend time with is not, it doesn't stop at my fingertips. It's something a lot more sophisticated than that. And so to get a little spiritual here, I want to end on this little dialogue from Ramana Maharshi, where somebody asked him, how are we to treat others? And his response was, there are no others. And I think by practicing the cultivation of sovereignty in groups, you inadvertently start to realize this. You realize that your goals on their own never really mattered that much. And it's really more about these little micro tribes. So with that, I'm just going to say one quick thing about where we go from here. So part of the aim with this session, the Metagame Mastermind 1 year later, is to summarize what we learned in the year and then to close off the Metagame Mastermind. So this will be the last Metagame Mastermind session. And for those of you hearing about this for the first time and who are feeling disappointed now because what I said sounded interesting and exciting, I'm sorry, there will be no more Metagame Mastermind sessions. But the spirit will live on, because there will be a special event on June 3rd that will take some of the energy that we've been building here and take it to the next level. So if this is something that you're interested in, stay close to the STOA calendar and keep an eye on June 3rd. And with that, I will return back to the group.
All right. And that June 3rd event will be announced in my newsletter today. So stay tuned for that. Awesome. So how would you like to proceed, Daniel? Want breakout rooms now?
Yeah, so let's do a very quick breakout activity. So we're going to do 7 minutes and groups of 2. And The thing that I mentioned in the beginning of the session, I just want to create a space where you can potentially talk about it. So don't say anything you don't feel comfortable talking about. But the prompt for the chat is going to be, what's one thing that you know you should do that you haven't done? And that is just the starting point. And if you're the one speaking, share whatever that is. And if you're the one listening, try to be as compassionate in your responses to that person as possible, and then switch roles halfway through. Does that make sense?
All right, so I'm gonna, is it 7 minutes you said?
Yeah.